state of religious liberty here in America and abroad is in volatile territory. We see it in the U.S., we see it worse abroad, but at the same time, it's a slippery slope. It always is. It doesn't happen overnight. Tyranny doesn't happen overnight. Oppression doesn't happen overnight. We are seeing the beginning stages of it right now. We're seeing it, making it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which is concerning because it's like, that's a long way to go. It takes years for things to get to the United States Supreme Court, and yet that's what's happening. This stuff should be mitigated at the lower courts, or it just shouldn't be happening at all. What are y'all's thoughts?
John, are you talking specifically about the 303 Creative?
Well, we could talk about 303 Creative too. That is the new one, yeah.
Well, that's a fascinating case, right? I was reflecting upon this and really the issues facing religious liberty in the United States over the last decade plus. And it really comes down to this. If you are walking into a Christian organization, a Christian business, and you're insisting that they provide a service for you in violation of their sincerely held religious beliefs, when you could go across the street to another commercial business that has no issue providing it, you're not the good guy in this situation. You're the bigot. And that's the problem, is that essentially the LGBT agenda has cloaked itself in actually religious language. And they're claiming discrimination, and they're saying that their rights to their sexual expression trump our most foundational and fundamental beliefs of religious freedom and expression.
And some will say, well, we're not actually doing it to be bullies, and they'll even say that that's a rash accusation, except look at it this way. 303 Creative, which we'll explain what that is in a second, it mirrors the almost decade-old Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado, right? So what happened there? Like same thing as you're saying, gay couple walks into a bar,
that's the start of a joke that we're not telling.
So it walks into a bakery and demands that someone who they know is a Christian custom design a cake in this case that illustrates something that goes against their religious convictions, okay? Well, here's the thing. 6 years later, he is on narrow grounds. Jack Phillips, the baker, is freed. The Supreme Court rules in his favor. That's great. Except twice now since then, Mr. Phillips has been sued again, and by a lady who is also an attorney who has on the record said that I'm calling his bluff. She literally went to him because she heard that he's not going to make the cake. She's like, well, I don't think he's actually going to deny it. I don't know why she said that. 6 years of litigation. I mean, come on, it was all over the news. But she said, I don't think he's going to do it. So she's on the record saying, I'm calling his bluff. I'm going to go to him because he's that way. So you can't say, these people cannot say that they're not doing it to be bullies. They can't say that they're doing it just because they happen to want a cake from that place. Now, Jack Phillips was renowned. He's known for being a very good designer, but he's also known for being a Christian, and he has rules against making cakes that illustrate same-sex marriage, but also alcohol, Halloween, and divorce, and a list of other things. They're being picked on. It's terribly
some of the cakes
immature.
he's been asked to make are unspeakable.
Yeah, and I think you see an inconsistency, or at least an overrepresentation of Christians being brought to court as opposed to other religious minorities. Not that we want religious minorities of other sects or religions to be brought to court, but we're seeing this, it seems to be, at least the evidence, the circumstantial evidence seems to be clearly targeting of Christian businesses, bringing them to court, trying to get them shut down, all for the purpose of getting court precedent and getting decisions to rule in the favor of whatever is the current goal of the LGBTQ activists. So I think for people who are not religious, maybe there's an important point here that they can get behind. With the Jack Phillips case, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor mostly on First Amendment free speech grounds, because they said he should not be able to be compelled to communicate something that he did not believe in. That's a free speech issue, just as much as it is a religious liberty issue. And I think for anyone who is maybe not a Christian or not religious, and they're like, what's the big deal about why would you not make the cake? Or even Christians that would say Jesus would make the cake. Well, it's not just about making the cake. It's about
Jesus would not make the cake.
Yeah, it's about communicating something that you do not believe is true, and whether or not governments can compel you to speak or communicate in such a way.
It's discrimination based on identity and discrimination based on message. If they had gone in there and Jack said, I'm not going to make this for you because you're gay, that would have been a completely different judicial argument than it was, I'll create, and Jack did say, I'll create whatever you want. Just nothing that specifically illustrates something that goes against my faith. Go ahead.
Well, I think also for folks watching this who are religious or non-religious, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the First Amendment's trying to do, right? In our postmodern era, there's this thought that the First Amendment is supposed to create some sort of neutral public square. Well, neutral public square doesn't exist. Everybody brings competing faith claims into it. And also people think that the First Amendment, separation of church and state, and the free exercise of religion is meant to both protect the church from the government and also to protect the government from the church. And that's not accurate, right? That's not how our founders envisioned it. We are free as Christians or other faith individuals in this country to bring our faith into the public square. And we really started seeing a change in the language on this under the Obama administration. Obama would regularly use the phrase freedom of worship instead of freedom of religion.
There's a difference. So speaking of bringing our faith to the public square and speaking of how the church can be integrated in culture, you both wrote some white papers. These are adaptations of the white papers in these booklets here. William Wolfe wrote one, Voting Principles for Christians. Dr. Tim Yonts wrote one called, this title's great, Christian Love versus COVID Conformity. Gentlemen, you want to talk a little about these? Tim, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I wrote this white paper in response to what I saw was a prominent trend among a lot of Christian influencers and Christian figures in the public square that were saying that, well, the biblical mandate of loving thy neighbor should be translated into going along with these mandates that we had seen over the last 2 years, whether that was the lockdowns or the mask mandates or even the vaccine mandates. And so the argument basically went that, well, these mandates are in place and the demonstration of Christian love is to follow the mandates. And what was assumed in these arguments is that the mandates actually worked, whether that was the lockdowns worked to stop the spread of COVID, or the mask mandates worked to stop the spread of COVID, or the vaccine mandates actually worked to stop the spread of COVID. And what I point out in this article is that over 2 years, we have enough data now to, at the very least, question the truth of each of those premises.
And if it's questionable, that, in my opinion, is enough to not force it on someone.
Yes,
exactly.
So because the central point is that Christian love has to be grounded in truth. If you are not acting in accordance with truth, if you are not acting in accordance with what you believe is true, you cannot be acting in a loving way. And so if the premise that lockdowns stop the spread, if that is called into question, or mask mandates stop the spread, if that is called into question, or vaccine mandates, if any of these are called into question as not true or maybe likely not true, and I think the data is showing that, this isn't saying that vaccines aren't safe or effective, but we're talking about the mandates themselves. If that is called into question, then the argument that, well, Christian love demands or requires that you or I go along with them, well, that's out the window. Christian love requires that we might respect one another and respect the conscience of one another. So that's the point I make in my article.
So would you say that if it's not grounded in sort of a firm truth, it transitions from a realm of Christian love vis-a-vis obedience to just a realm of Christian wisdom and prudence?
Yeah, no, it's a good way to put it. I would say it translates from a rule of obedience to Christian love to a rule of prudence to Christian liberty.
That's right, from love to liberty.
Yes.
And that's where me choosing to exercise my liberties, my freedom of conscience, to not necessarily co-sign with this questionable agenda is not me in any way not loving you.
Yeah.
But in fact, if you require me to infringe upon my conscience because of your opinion, you're actually not loving me very well.
Yeah, if we use political coercion to bring people into the fold of whatever we want, be that masks or vaccines or lockdowns or whatever else we can dream of for COVID, and we are not absolutely sure that those things actually are true, then we are not acting in a loving way. We're acting in a rather unloving way toward our neighbors.
So let's say this. Martin Luther King is noted for saying that we have to change hearts, right? But laws are in place for the hearts that won't change. Now, some would probably take that and try to apply it here. I like to take that and apply it to, say, abortion, where it's inarguable abortion ends a life. When the woman goes in to have an abortion, a successful abortion, she walks out of there unscathed, right? Unscathed. She walks out of there alive.
Lord
what
willing.
was terminated? Yeah. What was terminated? The life of the unborn. So that is an absolute way where we can say that we should make abortion illegal, because until the woman's heart is changed, we have to have laws in place to protect the baby, right? But in this case, there is no such absolute information. There is very, very questionable information to say, like, look, you can't say, oh, we need to make these mandates until these people realize the truth. The truth has been so scoured, especially by those who are implementing these mandates. It's embarrassing. Oh, gosh, right? I hate that
science.
Yeah,
I don't
I
believe
think
in truth.
The difference between like the pro-life abortion argument and these is that we can draw a direct causal link between someone actively terminating the life of an unborn child. You cannot draw a direct causal link between a lockdown or not adherence to a lockdown and person X or community X,
Exactly.
being overridden with COVID, because the data is showing there's no correlation to that. Same with masks, same with vaccines. There's not a direct causal link. So drawing the analogy between the two is a false analogy.
Yep.
It just doesn't work.
That's what I was saying. Like people try to do it. They love to do that. Love the neighbor and all this. We have a few minutes. William, why don't you talk about your voting privilege, your voting principles one?
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, I address sort of a biblical principles for voting for Christians. Essentially, why should Christians vote and how should Christians vote? And the why that Christians should vote is essentially, I argue, it's an act of love for self and for neighbor, and it's also a stewardship, and we should seek justice. So briefly, let me walk through those three. And this is really tricky. We have to define our terms and our language, because love is simultaneously the fulfilling of the commands for Christians, and it's one of the most misused terms in our lexicon in America and in Christianity. But I think that you should vote as a Christian to love our neighbors, both religious and non-religious, Christian, non-Christian well. Why? Well, because we believe that we have God's revelation. God speaks, and so we know the truth about our lives. We know the truth about our accountability to Him for our sins, the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then we have a whole ethical and moral system that comes with that. And so if we believe that we have access to the to knowledge of created reality and God's ethics and moral principles, which we do, why would we not want to see those brought about in our lives, in our public square, and our laws? So we should do it out of love for self and neighbor. We should also do it out of stewardship. God has gifted us here in the United States in particular with political freedoms essentially unbeknown to mankind in the history of the world. And for us to step away from that it's like burying our talent in the sand. And I think that God will actually judge us if we do that. Of course, if we're in Christ, that's not going to keep us out of heaven, but we should use it well. And then finally, to seek justice, not necessarily social justice, not woke justice, but true biblical justice, where people are judged according to their actions, not according to the color of their skin. And so those are kind of the three main principles for why I think that Christians should vote.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I think that non-voting, people say, oh, I'm not going to vote because it's not going to make a difference. Okay, you are the reason. The people who use that argument, you are the reason that bad things happen. Okay, when you say I'm not going to vote,
it's your fault.
If you say I'm not going to vote because it won't make a difference, you are in fact making a difference, and it's not a good
vote for
one.
the status quo.
Yes,
Jacob said that.
It is by de facto a vote for the status quo. You are lessening the strength that could go towards the better vote, the better option. I don't want to get into the lesser evil argument because we would need like 20 minutes for that. But I really do appreciate these papers. They will be available online soon. What I like about them is that these are academically delivered. It's factual. They didn't go into it swinging. And I know both of these guys, they could have gone into it swinging. And that maybe there's an op-ed or something like that for that. But I really do appreciate the work you guys put into these things. They're good reads. They're long reads, but they're easy reads as well. So thanks for your work, and we'll have more discussion to come.
Thanks for having us.
John.